The Japanese didn't just copy, they radically improved. They realized the problem with the 163 was that it didn't carry enough fuel, so they made it bigger.
This new and improved version was called the Type II rocket fighter. Fitted with delta wings for speed, it was to be powered by 2 rocket motors. Bigger and faster than the original Comet, and armed with missiles, it would have hunted the B-29s from the sky. The Navy also developed a manned rocket bomb for kamikaze attacks.
The use of the Baka bomb, the Fool, or as the Japanese called it, the Oka, was essentially as a long-range attack against the American fleet. In defense of the home islands, it having to be carried into combat by a Betty bomber would have been suicidal for the bomber crew itself. Essentially, the bombers would have been shot down before the Baka ever got within range to go on against the fleet.
As a result, the Japanese Navy drew up plans for a jet bomber to replace the Betty.
It was called the R2Y, or in the translation of the Japanese name is Beautiful Cloud. But the R2Y was never given one of the Allied identification names by technical air intelligence because they simply didn't know it was there.
The first prototype of the R2Y was finished in April 1945. As its twin jet engines were not yet ready, it flew fitted with an ordinary propeller engine. The final jet version would have had 2 engines slung under the wings. The speed of the jet R2Y would have been 500 miles per hour at over 30,000 feet, impossible for any U.S. fighter to intercept.
You have to remember that technical air intelligence knew nothing about the new generation of Japanese jet aircraft like the R2Y. Essentially, they were making the same mistake as 1941. They thought, well, we stopped the German technology getting to Japan, so the Japanese can't do it on their own, and they were in for a big surprise.
How costly could this intelligence failure have been? Imagine if the Allies had been forced to invade the Japanese home islands. It is the spring of 1946. A U.S. and British invasion fleet approaches the shores of the Japanese home islands. Corsairs of the U.S. Navy fly patrol overhead. Suddenly, a Japanese supercarrier launches a strike of jet aircraft against the fleet.
The Japanese aircraft flying in from the home islands would have benefited from the ground clutter of the home islands. The American radar would not have been able to pick them up. They would have essentially been seen the first time when that lookout with his binoculars saw them flying in. And that would have had devastating results on the American fleet.
Flying too fast for U.S. fighters or anti-aircraft gunners, the R2Ys would streak home dropping torpedoes or firing air-to-surface guided missiles. The Allied carriers would be reduced to floating hulks. Waves of Kika attack planes and R2Y bombers would then fly out from their mountain caves to strike at the troop ships.
The planes would have come in with very short flight times and would have hit the most vulnerable ships first: the troop transports, the hospital ships, the ammunition ships.
History had a different ending. The B-29 did indeed deliver the knockout blow that the Japanese had so feared, before planes like the Type II rocket fighter could be mass-produced. But one disturbing question remains. How had Japan kept its secret air force hidden from technical air intelligence for so long? The answer lies hidden deep under Japan's mountainous terrain.
You're watching Secret Japanese Aircraft of World War II on the History Channel.
August 9th, 1945. Just days after the atom bomb falls on Hiroshima, Communist Russia declares war on Japan. The Soviet Secret Service immediately begins to scour Manchuria for evidence of advanced Japanese aircraft technology. The U.S. is not far behind.
At the end of the war with Japan, technical air intelligence units rushed to Tokyo, desperate to find out the state of Japanese aviation technology. In particular, they were worried that a lot of the prizes of Japanese invention would fall to the Russians, who had just invaded Manchuria.
But the prize is not in Manchuria. Just 6 months earlier, the Japanese High Command had ordered its aircraft manufacturing plants built out of reach of United States bombing. Japan's mountainous terrain was perfect in which to hide. Abandoned mine workings and railway tunnels were turned into factories. New tunnels were dug deep into volcanic hillsides by Japan's army of miners.
Technical air intelligence discovered over 100 underground Japanese aircraft factories buried deep under the mountains. They would have been safe even from nuclear attack.
The Japanese military had calculated that even if Japan could no longer win the war outright, then she could make capturing her imperial heartland cost 1 million American lives. The implications are enormous. Safely hidden in their bomb-proof caves, the new rocket and jet planes might have provided the means if they'd been ready.
They found a secret Nakajima factory with a production line for the Kika jet fighter, over 25 aircraft, well into final stages of assembly. And they found a separate production line for the R2Y bomber.
Technical air intelligence had been outwitted by the Japanese one last time. TAI personnel found over 12,000 combat planes hidden in Japan's underground factories and airfields. A secret air force, completely undetected by Allied high command. Many of the most advanced of these aircraft were brought back to America, and their secrets incorporated in post-war U.S. jet and rocket technology. Back in Japan, engineers like Hideo Itokawa, the man who helped create the Oscar fighter, were out of a job.
By terms of the surrender, when the war ended, all aviation activities in Japan were immediately suspended. That meant a lot of people out of work, including many very good engineers and designers.
After the war, Itokawa turned to medical engineering. In fact, he was the first man to develop an artificial heart in Japan. But he was soon to be called back to the aviation industry.
In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, and the Cold War turned hot. A year later, America signed a formal peace with its new ally, Japan. Former aeronautical engineers in Japan rushed back into jet plane research. The manufacturers of the Kika, Hideo Itokawa's old Nakajima company, also returned to jet production.
After the war, the Nakajima Aircraft Company changed its name to Fuji Heavy Industries and transferred out of war work, obviously, into commercial engineering. But when the Cold War turned hot in Korea, Fuji got back into the aviation business.
Nakajima Fuji built its first post-war military jet plane in 1958. It was called the T-1.
Post-war Japanese aircraft engineering reappeared in disguise of American airplanes. These were built under license for their own armed forces through their own manufacturer. Among these were the F-86 Sabre that the JASDAF, Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, used, the Lockheed P-2 that Kawasaki built for the Japanese Navy. There were even later aircraft such as the Starfighter.
But one man who refused to return to aviation work was Hideo Itokawa.
In 1953, Itokawa paid a research visit to the United States. He was still involved in medical engineering at that time. But when he got to America, he discovered something that he had never thought of before. He discovered the American space program.
Returning home, Itokawa restarted the Japanese rocket program, this time for peaceful purposes.
By as early as 1954, Itokawa had tested his first homemade Japanese rockets. They actually reached an altitude of 100 kilometers. With this achievement, Itokawa became known as the father of the rocket in Japan.
Japan launched its first satellite into orbit on February 11, 1970, making it only the fourth nation to reach space after Russia, America, and France. The Cold War made old enemies friends. It also changed the fortunes of Frank T. McCoy of Technical Air Intelligence, who returned to duty with the United States Air Force. In an ironic twist, the same problems of identifying and naming Japanese aircraft in World War II emerged with Russian aircraft. So McCoy was assigned to NATO to set up a system of code names for Soviet warplanes. He gave bombers names beginning with B, such as the Bear. Fighter names began with F, like the MiG-21 Fishbed. But somehow, these code names were never as romantic as those chosen for Japanese planes in the dark days of World War II, when technical air intelligence helped turn the tide of the Pacific War.
Modern historical research has uncovered the fact that Japan in World War II, with very minimal help from outside, had developed a whole range of advanced aviation technology: jets, rockets, guided missiles. It was a tremendous achievement.
Today, Japan is a participant in the International Space Station project. Plans exist for a Japanese manned space shuttle, manufactured by Nakajima Fuji. It will be the direct descendant of the Type II rocket fighter of 1945. One of the many secret Japanese aircraft that could have tipped the scales of victory had time